You know, when we look at history, we're often looking at dusty old objects in a museum. But I want you to look at this rifle a little differently. Don't just see the steel and the wood. I want you to see it for what it really is, a blueprint. This is the story of how one brilliant idea, brought to life in a quiet workshop, completely rewrote the rules of war and changed the world. It's not really about a gun. It's about an idea that armed the common soldier with an almost unbelievable amount of power.
I know that sounds dramatic, right? Almost like a movie poster tagline. But stick with me here, because that question is not just for show. If you could ask the soldiers who were pinned down on the beaches of Normandy or fighting for their lives in the suffocating jungles of Guadalcanal, for them, the answer to this question was very, very real. It was the difference between life and death.
Now listen to that quote for a second, and think about who said it. This isn't some American general trying to boost morale. This is from the other side. This is an enemy soldier. Imagine what it must have been like to face this thing. To him, the M1 Garand wasn't just another weapon. It was relentless. It was something that just didn't stop. That kind of psychological impact, well, that was almost as powerful as the weapon itself.
So, to really get why the M1 was such a game changer, we have to rewind a bit. We've got to understand the world it was born into. Before the Garand, pretty much every army on Earth was using a bolt-action rifle. And look, they were good weapons, accurate, reliable, but they all had this built-in flaw, this deadly rhythm on the battlefield, a rhythm that the enemy had learned to use against them.
And this right here, this is the brutal, terrifying math of that kind of fight. For every single shot a soldier wanted to take, he had to physically break his aim, yank that bolt up and back, then slam it forward and down, and only then could he get back on target. In those few seconds, an enemy soldier could run 10, maybe 15 yards closer. The Japanese military practically perfected tactics like the banzai charge, which was built entirely around exploiting that tiny delay. It was a race against time that a soldier with a bolt-action rifle was always going to lose.
So who finally cracked this deadly puzzle? Well, this is where the story gets really good, because the answer didn't come from a war room full of generals. It came from a guy named John Cantius Garand. He wasn't a military man, he was a self-taught mechanic, a guy who just loved to solve complex problems. And he saw this deadly rhythm of warfare as just another machine that was broken, and he was going to fix it.
And this was his fix. It's honestly pure mechanical genius. See, instead of letting all that explosive energy from the gunpowder just go out the end of the barrel, his design siphons off a tiny little puff of that hot gas. And it uses that little puff of gas to power a piston that does all the work for you. It automatically throws out the old cartridge, slams a new one in, and gets the rifle ready to fire again. The whole thing happens in less than 1/10 of a second, literally faster than you can blink.
And would you look at the results? The rate of fire didn't just go up a little bit, it tripled. A good soldier could go from 15 rounds a minute to nearly 50. But that's not even the most important part. Look at that second line. Sights remain on target. That is the whole ballgame. For the very first time in history, a regular soldier could fire 8 shots without ever taking his eye off his target. That vulnerability, that deadly pause, it was just gone, replaced by a constant, unrelenting stream of aimed fire. Every piece of revolutionary tech has a moment where it stops being a theory and becomes a terrifying reality. For the M1 Garand, that moment came in the dead of night at the Battle for Henderson Field on Guadalcanal. When U.S. Marines and soldiers landed, they brought something new with them, a new sound, a sound the Japanese soldiers who were so used to that predictable crack of a bolt-action rifle simply couldn't understand.
Just look at these numbers. They're absolutely devastating. The Japanese forces threw wave after wave of soldiers at the American lines, expecting them to be vulnerable during those reload cycles. But the reload cycles, they never came. When the sun came up, the battlefield was littered with more than 2,000 Japanese dead. The Americans lost fewer than 100. This wasn't just a lopsided victory, it was a slaughter, made possible by a piece of technology the enemy had no answer for.
And this right here, this quote from Corporal Leo, a man who was right there in the thick of it, it gets to the absolute heart of the matter. It's about the pure psychological shock. Can you imagine? You're charging an enemy, you've timed your whole attack around those little moments of silence, those gaps in the gunfire you need to survive. And then, the gaps just aren't there. It wasn't just a battle for them, it was their entire understanding of tactics completely falling apart in real time.
Okay, so having a game-changing weapon is one thing, that's fantastic, but making enough of them to equip an army of millions, fighting a war across 2 different oceans, that is a whole different ballgame.
So how on earth did America go from having just a few of these rifles to putting an M1 Garand in the hands of almost every single soldier? Well, it took nothing short of a production miracle.
The sheer power of American industry coming to life is just breathtaking when you see it laid out like this. Just follow the numbers. In 1937, they were making a measly 10 rifles a day. By 39, 100 a day. By 41, 600. And then by 1943, over 4,000 rifles were rolling off the assembly lines every single day. Factories that used to make sewing machines and typewriters were now churning out parts for the Garand. It was an industrial tsunami.
And there it is, the final tally, almost 5.5 million M1 Garand rifles. To put that into perspective for you, Germany, with all its famed engineering, only managed to produce about 400,000 of their version of a semi-automatic rifle during the entire war. America was outproducing them by more than 10 to 1. This wasn't just about having a better rifle anymore. This was about burying your enemies under an avalanche of industrial power.
But you see, the true legacy of the M1 Garand goes way beyond World War II. It didn't just help win that war. It fundamentally changed how every war after it would be fought. It set a new standard, a new baseline for what a single soldier could do, and every other army in the world had to scramble to catch up.
This is where the rubber really meets the road. Let's look at the math at the squad level. A typical American squad could put out 3 times the volume of aimed, sustained fire as their Japanese counterpart. This concept is called fire superiority, and it became the heart and soul of American military doctrine. It basically means you can put so many bullets in the air that the enemy can't even lift their heads up to shoot back. You control the fight.
And once again, we hear from the other side, this time a German officer. He's admitting that the sound of the M1 Garand became a weapon itself. It was the sound of an unfair fight. It was the sound of overwhelming power, and it crushed the morale of his troops before they even really got started. It was the sound of a technological gap that they just couldn't cross.
So let's wrap up its legacy. The Garand's success created ripples that are still felt today. It forced every other country to adopt the idea of fire superiority. The world's most famous rifle, the Soviet AK-47, it was designed specifically because the Red Army had seen what the Garand could do. The M1 Garand proved that the individual soldier, if you gave him the right tool, could be a truly decisive force on the battlefield. It's a philosophy that defines the modern military.
So we'll end on this thought, General Patton's famous quote. And you know what? For his time, he was 100% right. But it makes you wonder, doesn't it? Today, in our world of silent drones, of cyber attacks that can shut down a power grid, what's our greatest battle implement? What's the new M1 Garand? It's a really interesting question to think about. Because if there's one thing the story of this rifle teaches us, it's that the next world-changing invention is probably being hammered out right now, in some quiet workshop, by somebody we've never even heard of.